Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining our event. My name is Jose Garcia. I'm hosting. Um, this is a part of the webinar where I kill 90 seconds while everyone signs in. And we've had a lot of people, a lot of interest in this webinar. This topic has been really popular. We're not going to go into an introduction of what digital therapeutics means. I think everyone knows. So we're going to skip past that and just a few. My name is Jose Garcia. I work for Radency. We're a healthcare software engineering company. And I'm going to start introducing our first speaker. And this is someone I've been following for quite some time on LinkedIn, Dr. Harvey Castro. And a lot of you have seen him before on, maybe you've seen him on television or in virtual events. And he's a frequent speaker on the subject of AI and virtual reality, and also digital therapeutics. And he's coming. He's coming to us today from Dallas, Texas. I understand.
Yes.
And if
Yeah.
could we bring on Dr. Harvey Castro?
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I love all the panelists here today. So it's been exciting to meet everybody prior to starting.
Nice meeting you too, Dr. Castro. So we're not going to introduce a topic of digital therapeutics, I think, because everyone um, understands what it is, and but I'm wondering if you can give us a State of the Union for 2024 and of what's your statement of the market as it is right now, what's exciting, and what kind of problems, what are the big problems we're seeing in digital therapeutics this year?
Yeah. Well, let me jump right in. So, first of all, I think we're in amazing times that we're living in. I'm a little jealous. I wish I was still in medical school, and I know that sounds crazy, but I would love to be in medical school right now with all these toys and all these digital therapeutics that we can do. And I'm seeing a rapid growth and innovation, just starting with the Apple Vision Pro. That alone, that AI, VR, mobile health applications, is going to change things in that some people that never would have jumped into VR, now with the Apple Vision Pro, they're saying, yes, it's expensive, but it's giving them tools that they're saying, you know what, let me look at this. And so just the mere fact that some people are just talking about it or considering it, that's huge in this space. I'm not trying to self-promote when I say I wrote the first book in the world about Apple Vision Pro and healthcare, because I see the potential, and this is why I want to answer this really well, that we're combining AI, VR, and creating health applications, and it's going to be amazing for our patients in the mental health care space, and we'll go into the Q&A. The other exciting developments is that whole personalized AI, or that whole increasing accessibility to get to these therapeutics. For example, going blank on the name, and I'll have it during the Q&A, but basically there's a company out there that is focused on mental health, that you're able to put your Apple Vision Pro, turn it up into immerse in it, and then you're having a conversation with the bot saying, hey, I'm stressed out, and then it's taking you to your happy place, and it's giving you the colors and the sound, and it's immersing you into that and helping you, and simultaneously this bot is helping you with your psychology. And so it's giving you therapeutic ways of helping you in that, let's say in psychology or mental health. Obviously, the challenge to this and every healthcare issue would be just this critical issue of, you're giving up your rights in a way. You're putting yourself out there, and how secure are these servers? How secure is my data? Now, what really excites me, the next part of this is, some of the key things is just, again, this AI personalization. I'm going to give a simple example. I love this example, and it'll bring it home for you. In the AI world, if I'm an ER doctor, if I see a child that's 5 years old and I give them a discharge papers, I usually type them up and say, here's your discharge papers, and I hand it to the parents. The kid is really out of it. I do my best to educate them, but at the end of the day, in the United States, I only get 13 minutes with the child or with any patient. But if I use AI, this is the part that I'm saying AI personalization. The skinny is I can customize the treatment. I can put my current discharge instructions, feed it into ChatGPT. It'll give me the core concepts, and now it'll create a cartoon coloring book. And now I give the child a coloring book. Now I'm talking their language. I talk to it as a 5-year-old. I'm using the pictures, and now I can do that. Moving quickly, just the accessibility of improvements. Now, I could do things. Let's say I do speak Spanish, but let's say I didn't speak Spanish. There's all this AI now that I can, as a doctor, change my language and speak to my patients in another language. I used to work in an airport, and now I can help them by translating into their language, and not only just their language, their culture. Here in the United States, the way you talk to someone in the East Coast is very different than someone in the South or in the West Coast. So now I can use AI to help me. Obviously, the next part to that would be the regulatory issues with that, pros and cons. I want to make sure that we're safe and we're moving forward, and I want our government to create the rules so that as these developers are creating, we have better products. And I think your last one, did you have another, was it a problems persistent? What was the last question? You had another, a three-part question there.
Oh,
Uh,
let's see. What problems are persisting?
There we go, that one. Thank you for the reminder. So as far as persisting, obviously the number one thing is if I'm a developer or I'm a doctor, depending what hat I'm wearing, how do we integrate that? And that's really important that we need to make sure that our healthcare system are integrating. As we're moving these solutions into the edge computing or edge technology, we got to make sure that that's one issue that we're addressing. The other one big thing is I have tons of friends that have amazing digital products, but they tell me, hey, Harvey, they're not paying for me to do this. Like, there's no reimbursement for this. And so we need to make sure that we're able to create some way of getting reimbursed so that these developers are encouraged to do these things so that the cost is not so high that by the time it comes to the consumer, it's just not going to be affordable. And the other part to this, I always talk about this, is I'm also worried about the digital divide. What's going to happen with the developing countries versus first world nations? You know, are we pushing so much of an advance? I call it the healthcare IQ. Are we creating a disparity where people that have the money and digital means to get to this information, and those that do not? I call it maybe those people will start living longer and have a better quality of life than those that do not. So I want to make sure that all these tools are accessible to everyone.
The you've raised a lot of interesting points. I think Alberta is going to be talking about commercialization pathways and reimbursement. I want to say something. This is just a comment on what you just said. The data and the privacy is going to be, I think, is going to be a bigger thing going forward. When here in Europe, we launched something called GDPR back in quite a few years ago, and when it first came out, if there was a data breach or a privacy breach, um, initially it wasn't, it didn't go viral. It wasn't a big deal. But then as years have gone on, the public has become more sensitive to it. Now with AI, even before the regulations have been passed, you've been getting, furores in the public about the use of data. So it's going to be people using this data. They're not going to have the kind of 3 or 4 years with the leeway that they had in the past with GDPR. Now I want to move on to my next question. Um, what are you seeing in terms of the adoption of your patients who are using digital therapeutics? Is it going smoothly? Is there a lot of room for improvement in terms of the usability and adherence with these products, or what advice would you have? This is another three-part question. I hope you don't mind. What advice would you have to people making these products or thinking about making these products so that people can actually use them?
Yeah, excellent question. So honestly, the adoption rate is all over the map. As you know, we have early adopters. We have people that just literally wait on the sidelines to see what happens. And I call it, and I'm not trying to be age discriminatory at all, but I feel like it really depends on where you are in the world, and what your age is. I know when I talk to my younger doctors, they're all about ChatGPT, like let's use it and let's go, and they're adopting it. And same with my patients. Patients that are younger, from the West Coast, Silicon Valley area, they're like, just bring it, doc. Like whatever you got, I'll take it. If I go out to East Texas and I wear a pink shirt, patients give me a hard time for just wearing a pink shirt, and they don't want to allow AI. In fact, some of the administrators there and patients tell me, "Hey, doc, if you're using AI, I'm out. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. It's the devil." And so it's really interesting to see how some people are adopting and some are not. Obviously, it also depends on their digital literacy. If I'm speaking to some of the Hispanic market that I'm here in Dallas, they don't have smartphones. They are still using flip phones, and they don't have that kind of technology. So it limits me what I could do with them. The other part is, there's a whole education and trust here. If I use AI and the patient doesn't trust me, they're going to say, what is this thing you're doing? So I need to take this black box and explain how AI works. I have to unpack it for them. In fact, again, I'm not trying to self-promote. In 2022, I wrote the first book called ChatGPT in Healthcare. My point was not for the book sales. It was just to educate doctors, because I'm like, if doctors don't understand and patients don't understand, they're going to fall into the bad parts of AI. And so my point is, let's educate and let's build that trust. Now, your next question was interesting. It says, what advice do I have for, improving this adoption rate? And back in when the first iPhone came out, I came out with the first app called IV Meds. And because I was coding a patient, I told the nurse, "Hey, we need to push this drug." And she's like, "1 second, doc." Went and got a textbook, went through, and then found the medicine and said, "Let's go." And I thought, you know what? This is not user friendly. Let me create an app that you tap 3 times, forget about a textbook, and let's go. And so that's my advice here. We need to do two things. The reason I was successful is because I'm a doctor, but then I'm an early adopter and I use technology. So we need to make sure that we tell our developers and people that are creating to make sure that we bring a doctor in the loop. Because if there's no doctor in the loop, we can create let's just say Microsoft can create the limousine. And then by the time it comes to the hospital, I look at it, I'm like, A, this doesn't fix my problem. B, you're increasing my workflow. And C, the usability is horrible. And so we need to make sure that these lessons that we're teaching developers, that we're creating this. Obviously, the last would be to make sure that we're creating these accessible tools for everybody. One last thing I want to also say, and then we'll hit the last point question is, I'm really excited about this Apple Vision and Apple Vision Pro, this whole ecosystem. I don't have any stock in Apple or anything like that, but just the point of, and I know Google has the same, being able to tap into that data, this Apple health data, and then just be able to explore all the digital solutions that I can help my patients, and I can create new things. I mean, literally, all I need is a great idea, access to these APIs, and obviously some cash. But then I can create some really fun products. And I'm using those 3 parts of my brain. I know we only have two, but the 3 parts of my personal brain is going to be that AI brain, that entrepreneur brain, and then that doctor. And then together I'm able to help patients, because at the end of the day, it's not about money. It's about how can we help people? How can we improve health? And how can we create that through digital therapeutics, that equal playing field, so that way everybody's able to increase their lifespan and have a better life. And I'm so excited about this. Now, your last question is, I think it was, what advice do I give developers to improve? It's those things that I already mentioned, and for sure, make sure that the culture is ready. The last thing is, we can create these amazing tools. We can create this thing. Like, I'll give you a quick example. Whitings created this cool tool, and basically you can urinate on it, and it gives you every day, it gives you 5,000 metabolites of what's going on in your body. And I thought, as a doctor, I'm like, holy cow, this would be so cool, because now I can send a patient home. I'll be like, hey, send me your data from this morning when you go urinate. And then I can go through and be like, oh my God, this is happening. This is going on. Let me change their medicine. So, but if the culture's not ready for that, if the people are looking at it like, I don't want that in my house, I don't want to do that, then that's going to create a block that it's not going to allow us to be able to do those things. So anyway, I'm sorry to be long-winded, but I'm
It's
really
okay. You
passionate about
answered the
this kind of
next
stuff.
question. You answered the next question I was going to ask you in the process of answering those three questions. And I think a
Awesome.
lot of this is actually maybe beyond the control, or is it, of the people producing the products? This is kind of a bigger question. And particularly like what I want to ask you is particularly what should people do to create products that can reach those hard to reach populations, like the people using the flip phones, or people in rural areas who've got a cultural objection to the or children, women, and the elderly. Is it? Do we just like, oh, that's not our department? Someone else has to educate them, or do you think the people producing the products, they've got a responsibility to try and reach them?
I think the latter. I think we have a responsibility if we're building a product to really just don't look at the profit margins. That's why, as a doctor, I have a hard time with even getting a paycheck. I think of the patient, and my favorite phrase is let's work backwards. So let's say this indigent population that doesn't have access to flip phones, how would I address it? I would literally get somebody to sponsor me. I would get some mobile trucks, and then I would put them in these populations so that these individuals can come into these mobile trucks, use computers, use this information, and be free, and then have an physician assistant equivalent to be there to help them with their healthcare. I really think that's a simple solution. I know it sounds expensive, but this would be a way to really hit the masses, explain it to them. The last thing I'm going to reiterate is, to your point, a lot of this is education. If the manufacturers don't realize that they're excluding XYZ, then we need to educate the manufacturers and say, hey, did you realize you excluded XYZ? And we need to make sure we address it. There's plenty of profit here. Why don't we use some of this profit to address it to this population? And so again, it's all about working backwards and education.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Guy. We're going to send uh, Dr. Castro away for a moment. We'll be bringing him back for the Q&A. I'm going to introduce our second speaker, who's joining us from Italy. Hello, Alberta.
Hello, thank you, Jose.
And she's the managing director of health innovation at Healthware Group. And I'm going to be going into a bit more detail about the commercialization and regulatory pathways for these products. And we've got a lot of people, Alberta, that are in the audience that are producing digital therapeutics. They already have, or they're thinking about it, or they're thinking of partnering with someone. And I thought what I wanted you to, first of all, is if you could speak to the regulatory and policy landscape in Europe that these companies have to navigate, and what kind of options do they have in terms of getting reimbursed?
Okay, yeah, sure. We can definitely discuss that because let's say that we know there are technologies and digital therapeutics and more broadly digital medical devices. So software certified as medical devices that have a demonstrable positive impact are increasingly available. But the real challenge and the mission that we also help address, that I've always personally helped address, and as Healthware we help address, is that of how do we actually make them become part of the standard of care? How do we actually enable them to actually be integrated across healthcare systems or adopted in clinical practice? And a key aspect of that is also that of being able to navigate the regulatory system and the policy pathways, where in some cases they can enable these devices to be reimbursed. So briefly, if we focus on Europe, a digital medical device would fit within the category of the regulatory pathway under the MDR. So at the European level, there is a European-wide medical device regulation that applies, and they fit within that as medical device software. Then, and that's key to be able to then have having that certification allows marketing authorization across Europe. Now that's fundamental, but it's also not enough to assure adoption, and especially not to assure reimbursement. So what's also then important is that some countries have realized early on the specific characteristics of digital medical devices, including those with a therapeutic intent, so like digital therapeutics, and have defined fit for purpose health technology assessment criteria. And then in addition to defining those fit for purpose criteria, they've also defined an adequate access and reimbursement pathway. And what do I mean by fit for purpose, HTA or health technology assessment criteria, and adequate access and reimbursement pathway? Well, first of all, some digital medical devices as digital therapeutics do require to meet specific health technology assessment standards that are associated with their software-based nature. So, for example, are they indeed certified as a medical device? Do they respect interoperability standards? Are they safe and secure? Do they comply with the GDPR regulations? So those are definitely aspects that are to be accounted for when assessing a digital medical device and a digital therapeutic. Then in addition to that, some countries have also said, okay, we acknowledge that they are relatively lower risk medical devices, and that the life cycle of the software is it's a short life cycle. So we need to kind of ensure timely access. And so some countries have started putting in place so-called fast tracks. So basically, the digital therapeutics that meets certain prerequisites is then reimbursed on condition that it generates evidence in terms of clinical efficacy within a certain time frame. Now, these pioneeristic countries have been, for sure, Germany, that has the DiGA pathway well established since 2019, with the first DiGAs being reimbursed, digital health applications being reimbursed in 2020. Now Germany has 56 DiGAs being reimbursed at the moment. 31 are permanently listed and reimbursed. 25 are temporarily listed. They meet prerequisites in terms of safety, security, interoperability, and they are now being reimbursed for in that temporary period during which they need to generate evidence of clinical efficacy. It's interesting. Recent numbers tell us that, well, first of all, that 52 out of the 56 are class 1 medical devices. Secondly, they increasingly are expanding across therapeutic areas. Of course, mental health is a perfect fit, but there's also the DiGAs in the musculoskeletal disorders, metabolic disorders, nervous systems, cardiovascular, and so on. In addition, we see that prescriptions are indeed increasing. There is still a lot to do around adoption and supporting adoption for that systemic integration and adoption, but that prescriptions have indeed increased. And it's interesting to see that over 70% of the prescriptions have actually been redeemed by women, and the age group that mostly has been using DiGAs is between 50 and 60 years old. Now, yeah, it's interesting. And in addition to Germany, we have France. France, again, has recognized the specifics of nature of digital medical devices and has therefore, within the medical device pathway, identified the subcategory of digital medical devices, and in particular then defined 2 possible pathways for those that have a therapeutic intended purpose, so digital therapeutics, and those that have a monitoring intended purpose, so telemonitoring devices, and indeed has set in place a so-called fast tracks, early reimbursement, meeting prerequisites and in condition to generate evidence in terms of clinical efficacy. England is another country that has moved early on. The NICE, National Institute of Health in England, has early on defined evidence guidelines for digital health technologies and different types of digital health technologies, including digital therapeutics, and has indeed been analyzing, assessing, and recommending different digital health technologies. However, reimbursement and actual access and equitable access is a little bit more fragmented in England because it then happens at the subnational level with the different NHS entities. And so that while there is kind of a fit for purpose assessment, there is less of a broad national equitable access.
When you say the subnational, you're talking about the English Health Service, the Scottish Health Service, Welsh, and then Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and also within that, so within England, for example, NHS, there are subunits that you would have to go through negotiating reimbursement. So the positive assessment doesn't automatically translate into a reimbursement decision that then has to be then worked on at the sub regional level, let's say. So those are important countries that have moved forward. Belgium as well was definitely an early pioneer country. They in early on 2018, 2019, they set forward what was their MF Belgium, so a platform for health applications certified as medical devices, and a different validation pyramid and requirements. It had digital medical devices had to comply with, and again, certified as medical device, certain technological standards and interoperability standards, and then also evidence both in terms of clinical efficacy and health economics could enable reimbursement. Now that's kind of it's under review. There will be updates soon on how reimbursement will happen there and how this is kind of being updated, so to also be more aligned also with the kind of the German and French approach. So there's a lot going on. We've been working a lot on this topic, both supporting not only how each country can structure its pathway in the best way possible, or manufacturers can navigate these pathway the best way possible, but also how you can have a European-wide strategy to support a broader commercialization strategy, and then already early on meet those HTA requirements and be able to navigate the policy landscape, as well as ideally supporting the fact that while it doesn't happen yet today, in the near future, there might be processes in place where at least some evidence transferability across countries where appropriate can happen. So that's definitely one aspect in terms of regulatory and policies. And then I'll leave it to you, but I do think that another aspect that's very important that also the speaker before me was addressing, in that we help very much with, is that adoption challenge. So even when you do meet the regulatory requirements, even where you do have access and reimbursement policies in place, you do have to work early on to be able to make sure that then your solution gets adopted. And that's a lot of what we work on.
I was going to ask you that. I want to ask you that is, what kind of? I'm going to ask you a two-part question. Specifically about digital therapeutics that you're seeing going through these regulatory processes in Europe, what are the biggest challenges you see in terms of adoption that keep coming up? If there's a recurring theme, maybe there isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think are the biggest opportunities for improvement that people are maybe missing?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenges that we see is, well, first of all, navigating the regulatory and policy requirements, making sure early on you set your clinical trial up in the right way so that it meets the requirements that are later being requested to be from the institution. So that's something that the earlier you address it, the better. And so that European-wide strategy that we help define also helps do that. The second aspect is in terms of adoption. Again, one aspect is that of kind of, we see companies being busy in developing the product and navigating the regulatory and policy landscape, and then focusing on adoption. However, it is very important, as Dr. Castro was also saying, to work on that awareness, on that culture early on, to engage all stakeholders early on, and of course clinicians first of all, but also patients and all stakeholders that play a key role across that care pathway and that are going to be adopting potentially or endorsing the adoption of your solution early on. And of course, we also help a lot with that, with the correct evidence generation and communication that is absolutely needed to support a cultural shift and an endorsement of generally adopting digital medical devices.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alberta.
Thank you.
We're going to bring Alberta back for the Q&A. I've already got a question from the audience for you, Alberta, but I'm going to save it for the Q&A. Now, Jovan, And the topic, this webinar was his idea, and they usually are. And Jovan is, I've been following Jovan on LinkedIn. He's privacy and compliance. He's um, if you want to understand privacy regulations, it's a really good idea to follow him on LinkedIn. He makes it very simple and understandable. Thanks for coming, Jovan.
Thanks, Jose, for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And I want to talk about. I'm gonna define a term: the compliance box. And the compliance box is the box on the roadmap. I know you're going to correct me and say there isn't a standardized roadmap for digital therapeutics, but there's a box in a flow chart somewhere where all the compliance stuff goes in. Maybe that's not the right way to think of it. Can you walk us through what's in that box? When people are developing digital therapeutics and they've got this box and they've got all these points they want to tick off, what do people need to know when they're in the compliance box?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's a nice box. It's a big box. The every country has its own different box, but in each country it's much better defined than in general digital health, medtech, and let's say a B2B company that wants to build a product and go to the market. At least in DTX space, the requirements and the box, what has to be inside is quite well defined at national states. And for example, BayFarm, the entity in Germany that will approve you, check if you have everything. They are quite good. They write in English also. They publish a lot of material. They publish updates. So they are quite transparent about what has to be inside there. What we have done at Chino, we focused on privacy and security compliance, everything that in that box relates to privacy security, and we help startups, companies to build and launch their products. What we have done, we created some material that you also can find on our blog, a bit of self-promotion, but it's also covering other aspects not related to privacy security. We try to map and identify common areas, and in each country, in each of these boxes, there are three subcategories, sub-boxes, big categories of compliance requirements that you need to show, to demonstrate. One is the medical certification. As Alberta was clarifying before, you need to be a medical device, a certified medical device, so you need to have medical certifications according to European standard in European countries, or perhaps in US, FDA approval according to US standards. That's one category of requirements. Then there is another one on privacy, data protection, and security, where you have GDPR requirements. You have specific security requirements defined in each single state. They add a bit of their own thing, their own spices here in this box. Then there is the GDPR certification, for example, that is something quite new that popped up in Germany, that the DIGAs that were mentioned before will need to go through by August, if I'm not mistaken, through a GDPR certification. Then there is the ISO 27001 certification, and there is the pen test that they need to perform. So this is what's inside this big box on GDPR compliance and security. And then there is the positive care effect, so-called the third box, that sometimes is left in the fast track in the next phases, that you need to collect data about your and prove that you're improving the healthcare with your DTX, not only that you're certified, but you're also providing positive care effects and improvements to the healthcare system. That's a third step. So as you can, we try to create in the blog post, for example, that was shared here, but also other material that I can share with you if somebody's interested. We try to categorize them and analyze them and compare different countries. What are the requirements?
I think, and I know you mentor a lot of startups. Um, there'd be a lot of costs involved in certifying and compliance. And if a startup doesn't have necessarily as much money as they would like, What advice would you give to them? Where to start to work on their digital therapeutics journey from a compliance perspective, especially if they're trying to control their costs?
Yeah. Well, what we have seen with some startups is they try to be as lean as possible in terms also of defining the roadmap. So they know the DTX, they know this great opportunity, but they're also trying to see whether they can monetize and build a business before being approved as a DTX. Because getting approved, we mentioned the compliance boxes and so on. You need really to spend hundreds of thousands of euros in certification and compliance in clinical trials costs and so on. And then you have this one-time application process and 1 year to collect the data, and you're really getting into a business strategy that is really costly. You need to know how to sell in Germany to the to an audience. You need to be able to compare yourself with pharmaceutical industry because digital therapeutics is therapeutics, so it's similar to the pharmaceutical industry. So it's really complex space and costly. What many startups are trying to understand whether they can do something before that, monetize, test, validate, create a product that is not necessarily digital therapeutics, but a lighter version or a B2C version or a B2B version before getting through the application process. And many are defining this step-by-step journey that is much leaner, gives more space to maneuver, and to launch a B2B startup, you need a fraction of the things that we mentioned previously in the compliance box. You can be much, much smarter. Yeah.
It's interesting that you said that about the pharma approach, because I noticed some of the digital therapeutic CEOs have been very successful. If you listen to them talk, they don't actually sound like digital health or health tech CEOs. They sound like pharma executives. And they'll even say that, you know, I think of myself as a pharma executive. I don't think of myself as a health tech executive. And but it's almost part of a promotional sales approach.
Yeah, definitely they know the sector, they know how to move into this space. They have reached also to the right investors to help them on this journey, because it's you need to have a lot of things in place, much more than a classical B2B or B2C startup in healthcare, medtech, and so on. Yeah.
What let's see. What should investors
Mm.
and partners know about compliance when they're evaluating this is kind of a two-sided question.
Mhm.
People who are investing are also people who are thinking of partnering with a digital therapeutics company. I know a lot of companies are worried. It's like, if we form a partnership with this company, are we going to be exposed to all their compliance risk if they don't do their job right? You know, and maybe you can correct me. Maybe this is something I've heard, but I wonder what kind of advice would you have for those people making that kind of assessment?
No, definitely. So every kind of partnership or just marketing partnership or co-selling partnership or business development partnership, every type of partnership brings its own risks, and we have seen corporates very reluctant, very risk averse, of course, with partnering up. For example, what pharma companies are doing, we are collaborating here in Berlin with Bayer, for example. They are partnering in a very lightweight with startups, sometimes investing and doing something more complex, but starting with a very lightweight approach to minimize all kind of risks. What happens in other sectors, in B2B and so on, is that companies, especially insurances, medtech companies, are doing a very tough due diligence on startups. And this due diligence, of course, it's on medical aspects like MDR certifications, but there the things are quite defined. Either you're certified or you're not. In the GDPR's data security compliance space, they do a due diligence that is more self-made internally by each company. They define their own compliance checklists. And sometimes it can be really tough. Sometimes they use third-party solutions to audit companies, and startups need to provide evidence of every single requirement. We assisted several startups, and sometimes can be really, really complex. So startups who want to work in B2B scenario, they need to be more ready than, for example, the B2C. They need to show that they are stable, that they're not going to mess up with the data of large companies, because the large company is going to be responsible ultimately to pay the fine and then come back to them. So large companies don't want that risk. When it comes to DTX, that's a bit of less of a problem in DTX. On one side, the DTX companies are more B2C because they are targeting directly the users through prescriptions, doctors, and health system. So partnerships, I'm not aware about something very particular in terms of partnership, perhaps with pharmaceutical companies, but that's more like investment, co-investment strategy, and so on. So that's one way of seeing it. And if a startup went through the process and reached, for example, the approval stage, it means that they have done their homework, and then somebody else did the due diligence also on them. So it means that those DTX startups, even though there are news about security glitches, privacy glitches, problems they had in the last years, that's true that there were some surprising news, but it means that anyway that those approved startups, they are the best in the class in terms of doing homework. So at least somebody else did the due diligence.
I haven't heard anyone complaining about them on Twitter, so they must be doing something right.
Yeah, they were in Germany, where privacy and security is really a big topic. Researchers were doing an analysis, and they, for example, identified, even though those companies had the pen testing, the ISO 27001, they discovered that there were some basic glitches, some basic problems. And every time there is something like that in the last couple of years, every time there is something like a big news, then BayFarm somehow reacts to that. And BayFarm added over the years, first, initially it was only just a checklist, but then later on they added ISO 27001, then a pen test, and now GDPR certification, which is a novelty. Nobody in Europe asks for GDPR certifications yet. The first thing is BayFarm that we are seeing. So we will looking forward, how this system, the framework will evolve. The overall topic is health technology assessment, and the overall strategy from European Union, we are working also with some bodies, is trying to uniform that, trying to create uniform health technology assessment frameworks, but it's going to take years and years.
Okay, I think we're going to go to Q&A now. So we're not sending Jovan away. We're going to keep him on screen. If we could bring Harvey and Alberta back. I've already got, maybe before the webinar started. By the way, if anybody has any questions, go ahead, pop them in the chat. And I got actually 3 questions that were sent to me by DM on LinkedIn before the webinar that I want to use. I want to submit the first one to Alberta. And this is kind of maybe, this is on non-prescription digital therapeutics.
Mhm.
So digital therapeutic products that aren't going through. And I think a lot of these are, you see a lot of these, they're not necessarily going through the regulatory pathway, they're just going direct to consumer via like some retail route.
Mhm.
What are the upcoming use cases? I think these are like, maybe this is what you think is hot or things that are notable. And there's a second part to this. How different are their compliance process? How different is a regulatory process versus regular prescription digital therapeutics? Are there any
Yeah.
are there any regulations that apply to these kind of digital therapeutics?
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, I mean, if they fit within the definition of a medical device, the MDR applies. So in order to be able to have a marketing authorization, then you do need to be compliant with the regulatory requirements of the MDR and be certified as a medical device. So that applies. Then the choice of your business model, and if you go kind of direct to consumer, that's a different business model versus the reimbursement one. And so I think there are 3 components to this to kind of dissect this question a bit. One is the regulatory aspect. Yes, if your product fits within the definition of a medical device, the MDR applies in Europe, and that certification is required to have a marketing authorization in Europe. The second step is the choice of a business model that can be direct to consumer through out-of-pocket spending, for example, and that versus reimbursement model. And then a third step to it is the prescription component. Now, the prescription component isn't necessarily up to the manufacturer, but it depends on the policy landscape and the healthcare system that has put that process in place and envisions it. So, for example, in Germany, if you're reimbursed through the DiGA pathway, then doctors can prescribe the DiGA. And that's not necessarily the case in all other contexts, nor is it really introduced by the manufacturer. So it's not really a choice up to the manufacturer if there isn't that process in place at the healthcare system level or envisioned by the healthcare system. So I think that from a manufacturer's perspective, the question is really, do I fit within the medical device definition and therefore need to comply with the regulatory requirements of the MDR and be certified as a medical device? First question. Second question is, what business model is most fitting for me? If it is that of reimbursement, and then there's a whole process there in certain countries to potentially prioritize versus others. And different question is instead if I want to go direct to consumer. So I think I've answered the question. I think most interesting case studies in terms of direct to consumer are in the US, really. There's lower propensity for out-of-pocket spending and adoption in Europe for digital medical devices that are not reimbursed. Generally, it's healthcare services not reimbursed.
I've got a question I want to submit to Harvey. Normally I'll actually give the same question to everybody, but we're going to run out of time. AI in digital therapeutics. How do people who are creating these products, how do they create and demonstrate value to healthcare providers?
Good question. So number one, to me, I want to say it again, it's working backwards. So we need to talk to the front lines because whatever the healthcare professionals are going to say, they're in the trenches. Obviously, we have to include the patient. If we include those two entities, they may point out pain points that are true pain points that need to be addressed by technology, as opposed to someone that's not in the trenches, not a consumer, saying, you know what, I think this is the best thing we need to do. It's not going to be implemented unless they happen to hit it right. And even if they hit it somewhat right, having that fine tuning of a physician or nurse or front lines people plus the patients really is going to give you success. I think one of the main reasons I was successful creating the first couple apps, I did about 30 apps, is because I was in the trenches. I was working, programming myself, and then later I had my own team, but I was in the trenches doing both. And I think that's the best way to do it. Because I was getting constant feedback from patients and saying, hey, we need this, we need that, or that was a pain point. So hopefully that answers the question.
I'm going to ask you another question, Dr. Castro. And do you see, and this might be kind of a complex, but do you see digital therapeutics as independent, standalone solutions? Or should they be deployed as an extra layer or supplemental to some kind of conventional treatment that a doctor supervises?
Yeah, no, great question. I personally think things are in stages. I remember when I wrote one of my first apps, Apple Store said, no, this is not going to be approved. And obviously now it's decades later, they're like, oh yeah, we would approve that now. And so some digital therapeutics, I think, may be best if they're just a standalone, just a kind of proof of concept. And I call it stages. Maybe your idea goes to stage 4, but that's not going to happen. Maybe you just got to come up with some stage 1 MVP that will be integrated. And then in the future, the way I see it is I really think it's all of it's going to be into one. We're going to have edge cloud computing. We have AI. We're going to have all these things go into one. Keep an eye out this year for Apple. Apple's going to put AI on your phone. They already have it now, but it's going to be a better AI. It's going to be in our Siri. So all of these things are going to start opening up, and people's culture are going to say like, okay, I accept this now. Whereas if you had done that a year ago, people would be like, hell no, I'm not doing that. But the fact that the culture is opening up, understanding they're only going to allow certain things. And that's my point. You can create the limousine, but people may not be ready. So you got to make sure that end users in the loop and that the culture is ready for that, especially in healthcare.
I think we have time for one more question, and this is going to be for you, Alberta. And we don't have a lot of time, though.
Go ahead, we'll be very quick.
Uh, what regulatory and policy requirements do digital therapeutics comply with in Europe to address these challenges? Oh, I think this is actually something that was actually this was posed in relation to something that Jovan was saying. What
Mhm.
regulatory does that question make sense to you?
So,
What
sorry,
regulatory and policy requirements digital therapeutics comply with in Europe to address these challenges effectively?
sorry, can you repeat? I don't see the question. Probably it's private.
It was at the 30-minute mark in the chat. So I believe it was while you were talking at the very beginning when you were talking, Jovan. What
Requirements bigger.
what regulatory and policy requirements digital therapeutics comply with in Europe to address these? This is difficult actually when you go back 30 minutes in the chat to read the question.
By
It's like,
Nabila Salis. Yeah. Uh, well, I think I explain more. I mean, what regulatory and policy requirements the DTX need to comply in Europe, so that the MDR on one side, GDPR on the other side, and these additional positive care effects. So somehow we try to map this. I can share more, perhaps in details. Um, as Alberta was saying, that's a bit different, for example, in UK, and also as mentioned here in the chat, there are some different rules in UK, but they are working also on a uniform approach. In US, there is a bill in the Senate, as far as I'm aware. We were checking like a couple of months ago that there is a bill that under approval for a national reimbursement. So also there will be different regulatory and requirements, but pretty much they're covering those two categories. On one side, you need to prove that you are medically safe. On the other side, that your data privacy and security safe. And at the end, that you really know what you're doing in terms of providing improvements to the healthcare system in a specific country also. So that's somehow what I
all
see.
all right, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Jovan, Alberta, Dr. Castro, for coming.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. And I want to, I'm just going to quick plug for my next event. It's actually not up, the event's not up on the 27th of March. And we're going to be doing an event on gamification in healthcare, specifically um, the healing power of learning through play. And we're actually going to be going, we're going to have a demo of a virtual reality um, program. And we have having a lot of people from the last, we had a webinar, I did a webinar on gamification that wasn't specific on health technology. And we had a lot of people ask these questions and we weren't able to answer them. So we're going to answer them in the next webinar. And I've done something cheeky, a little bit of us. We're a healthcare software engineering company, Radency. If you want to have a little chat with me about a webinar, or you want to collaborate, or you've got a project you want to talk about, at the end of this, when the webinar ends, you'll be taken to a web page will pop up. There's a big blue button. If you push the blue button, you go into my calendar. You can book a 30-minute meeting with me. And if I don't know the answer to your question, I'll try and find out who does. And that's it from us. We're out of time. Take care, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you very much for coming. Bye, everybody. I'll see you in March.